Can you start out by telling me what is the difference? Because there's been a lot of articles on air traffic controllers, but what you guys do in the Tracon you're not really called air traffic controllers though, right? You're something different.
Yeah, no, we had traffic controllers, we're just en route air traffic controllers.
What does en route mean?
As a, I mean, our airspace, we do all the radar departures and arrivals to all the airports in the metropolitan area. The New York Center or Boston Center is above us in airspace. And the Tracon owns mostly 10,000, some places 15,000 in the airspace. That's why, if you want me to go into that day a little, that aircraft that was pointed out was 29,000. And there was not a big deal to us. We just thought, or Bob Birch, who was in charge that day, and the people up at the desk thought he was just going to overfly the airport, overfly our airspace.
So wait, let me ask you this then, just so everyone understands. Because to me, when I think air traffic control, I think you're in a tower and you're actually seeing the planes. But when you were in the Tracon that day?
Yes.
Okay, so when you're in the Tracon, you're not actually looking out a window. It's all dark. It looks like war games. The airspace on screens. You're not actually seeing the planes.
Yeah, there's just radar, and there's different areas of the Tracon. There's Kennedy area, LaGuardia area, Newark area.
And it's all in that one
Islip
section.
Islip area in all different sections. And then there's one area called Liberty, which handles, basically they handle all the departures that leave the New York airspace. Not all, but almost all. And the towers work a departure just half a mile off the runway. They clear the plane for takeoff. After the plane is a mile off the runway, they switch into the Tracon. Now, inbound, the Tracon turns over the aircraft to the towers probably 8 to 10 miles out. It varies, but usually about 10 miles out is a good turning point. And then from there, the tower then clears the plane to land and separates them from the other landings and separates them from any departures.
That's perfect. Because I want to explain to regular people about the different sections, because that comes into play. So then what was your title / role on 9/11? Meaning, like, just what was your title?
And just to be clear, I worked at the Tracon from 1981 to 2002. But after 1993, I wasn't operational. I was more administrative. And that day, I was definitely administrative. I was an operational manager, and my role was the radar in charge of the LaGuardia area and the Islip area. So that when again, to be clear, when I went up to the desk that day, I was just curious. We were at a meeting, a staff meeting, which we had every morning, and we talked about budget, staffing, overtime, things like that at the meeting for our various areas, if there was any other issues. And a person came in who was in charge of quality assurance, and they said, there's a hijacking going on. And I knew Bob Birch was in charge, so I said, just out of curiosity, I went up there to see what was going on. Just to talk about hijacking for a second.
I was just going to ask you that. Does that happen often?
Well, as far as I started in the FAA in 1970, as far as I know, hijacking went on in the late 60s. And it was more that they used to make a joke, they were from Cuba where they couldn't fly home anymore. So they would hijack a plane to just say, take me to Cuba. Then when they got to the Cuba, they would leave, be arrested. And that was the extent of it. I don't ever remember it happening after that. It may have, but I don't remember any time that I was involved or anybody I know was involved with hijacking after I started in the FAA.
So hijacking in and of itself was like, wow, this never happens.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, it definitely, we could elaborate, it never happened the way it did in 9/11. We never thought in those terms. That
Right.
aircraft at 29,000, the American, we thought he's just going to fly overhead. We'll keep an eye on him, and that's it.
And what sector
The
was this in?
he's just flying overhead the entire airspace, and he had turned off his transponder, or a hijacker, I guess, turned off the transponder, which would show us the call sign of the airplane. I believe it was American 11 was the call sign. It would show the altitude and it would show the speed. So all we got on that aircraft was what they call a primary target, just a blip on the screen, and we had to try to follow it. But again, it was 29,000. We could try to follow it. And at a certain point, that's sort of when I got up at the desk, the operational people, Bob Birch, and the controllers at the desk, when I said the areas, is right in the middle of all the areas. It's elevated. So they couldn't find it. And at a certain point, the controllers in the LaGuardia area, and I believe a Kennedy Tower controller, I'm not 100% sure, had seen or heard other pilots report that the World Trade, the one building was hit. There was a plane that hit the World Trade. So they were telling us, do we have any reports? And we were still looking for that aircraft that was at 29,000 feet.
So you didn't know
The
anything
only-
about this other hijacking at all at that point?
The second one?
Yeah.
No. No,
Okay.
what happens is we're looking for that one. The only person besides the desk and me up at the desk that knew about the first plane was a supervisor in the Liberty area. His name was Steve Saul. You may remember him. He was a trainee for me. I was his supervisor a lot of years. He was a supervisor in that Liberty area. So he knew about it. And at the same time, the person I mentioned, that Don Krivlavi,
Yeah.
he was working the Liberty area, training somebody. And he sees the target on United, I believe it's United 175, but nobody is speaking to the airplane. And we would call that a no radio or a Nordo aircraft.
Mhm.
So they're all saying, who's this Nordo United? And it comes very close to another plane, a Delta. And Don is he's training somebody, but he's getting excited and telling Steve, I had seen the replay of the United the next day. They're able to replay downstairs in labs and stuff. And he just was going going out west, and then he made this great turn to come back. So Don Krivlavi says to Steve Saul, he says, look at this United. Nobody's talking to him, and everybody's calling him. United 175, do you hear New York approach control? And he's descending and going very fast. The normal speed of an aircraft in the Tracon airspace below 10,000 would be 250 knots. This United was going 590 knots.
Oh, wow.
Something like that.
Should
And
they?
he did not.
Sorry.
He did not shut off the transponder. So we saw the
Oh,
call sign, United 175. We saw the speed and we saw the altitude. So now everyone's looking for the World Trade. What the heck happened there with that one plane? And then this happens, and Steve Saul says to the desk, he says something like, I wonder if this plane is going to the second building and going to hit that building.
wow.
So that was the first time anyone thought in those terms.
Were they all like, oh, you're nuts?
No, I think everyone was just shocked. It was like surreal. I don't remember anybody saying yes or no or whatever. They just were like looking at him. I do remember we then followed United, hit the World Trade at that tremendous speed. And I remember Bob Birch as one saying, oh my God, we're in war now. There's going to be a war. He has young sons who would, would be war age, would be military age. And he expressed it, and that was the concern. It was just like surreal. Nobody knew what was going on. And those were the two airplanes. So
Can I ask a
that,
question?
yeah.
I hope this makes sense. Should either of those planes even have been in that airspace anyway? Like, was it weird that you're like, well, I don't know if it's that specific, but if you're handed off a plane, from what I understand, and you're monitoring it, would it be exceptional that you're like, why are these planes even here? Like, they shouldn't even be on this route, or no?
Well, the American, the one that was at 29 going over, should not have been. Well, we don't know where he was going. If the high altitude controllers, the Boston Center or the New York Center, were working him, we would have had no knowledge of him, and he would have been fine at a high altitude overhead. That happens all day. Planes are flying overhead that we don't know anything about. The other plane probably was initially in the correct airspace, just going out. He departed Boston, and he was just going out. And then once he stopped talking to anybody and made that turn, then nobody knew what he was doing.
Oh God. You said, I remember this, but also there were rumors at first, I think when the first plane hit, that it was a crop duster. Do you remember that?
No,
And you were like, what?
No, the people downstairs. Now, the second plane hit at 9:03, and again, it was going real fast. So somebody from downstairs, one of the technicians, called, and I answered. I basically at that point was just answering phones. I didn't make
Who was calling?
I didn't make any decisions as far as stop departures, stop the airspace, or anything like that. Bob Birch and the controllers up at the desk did, and in the different areas did. But I was just answering phones, and one person from downstairs called and said to me, "Oh, we're getting reports. Do you think it was a Cessna?" A Cessna is a little airplane that goes, well, there's Cessnas that go fast, but mostly single engine planes, and they go 100 knots, 120 knots. And I said to him, "Are you kidding me?" I may have said a little more colorful than that, but I said he was going 590 knots. So that plane hit, again, this is my remembrance, about 9:03. Bob Birch and them and the area supervisors had conversations, and they stopped, try to get rid of all the planes they had to just make them
So
land.
that didn't come from the ATC? I thought the ATC was like, okay, everyone land.
Well, first of all, ATC is air traffic control.
I thought it was like an entity, like a government entity.
No, but like there is, when you talk to Ben Sliney was doing business for the entire country. I'm just talking about the Tracon airspace.
So they made a decision at that moment.
I'm not sure how quick, but within certain minutes, they didn't want to take any more planes in our airspace. The World Trade itself is in the LaGuardia airspace. Okay. That's used as a reference point for landings. It was. So they didn't know what was going on. So controllers, when they get, I had told you this a while ago, when they get insecure, even if you're just working airplanes one day and you suddenly forgot something, or you all of a sudden are insecure about the operation, you're going to stop the departures. You're not, when somebody's flashing an aircraft at you, that means they want you to take a handoff. Mm-hmm. So you may not take that handoff. You may say, "I don't want him. Let me just figure out what I'm doing, and then I'll take it." And that's what basically happened a little at a time. That okay. The controllers
independently were like, "Wait a minute."
Yeah. Well, and the desk was telling them, "We don't know what's going on." I remember me walking to the Newark area. John Chinesi was the supervisor in Newark, and they knew about it. And we had said to them, somebody up at the desk told them to stop the departures. And then I made sure they knew. The supervisor in Kennedy area, I walked to him. His name was Eddie Sosa, and I don't think he knew about it, but some of the towers knew about it, Kennedy Tower, etc. So they were stopping inbounds and departures. My remembrance from 9:03, that second plane hit, by 9:09, we had no airplanes in our airspace,
Wow.
which is an amazing feat because this is a real busy time, a real busy place.
When, just going back really briefly, because I thought I remember you once saying this, when the planes were hijacked, was anyone from the tower trying to contact the planes, or there was just no point because there was no transponder, or no one?
No, I think the planes from way before they got to us departed Boston Logan Airport,
Right.
and of course they were trying to talk to them, and they heard, if I remember, they heard conversations on that American, that somebody was on that plane that shouldn't have been there. I think it was that one famous hijacker who had taken lessons in the United States, and they heard him say things. That's what made them realize that it was a hijacked plane.
Okay.
What there is a system where you could put the transponder on a certain code, and that alerts air traffic that you're being hijacked. That wasn't done. That would be done if the pilot was there and a gun was to his head. He would put it on a code, and that would alert air traffic.
Oh, okay.
But that wasn't done that day. And I think the United plane probably was working somebody who I don't know. I would assume it was working something like New York Center, just going out, and that or Washington Center, and then just shut off the radio with Washington Center and made those turns. That's what it probably was, to come back to go to the World Trade to hit it.
Was there ever a time where they were like across the United States, like beyond your airspace? That's it. Everybody land. That's
Well,
it.
that's again, that's in the movie United 93. What happened with United 93 was he was delayed. He was a Newark departure.
Who's he?
But there was Newark area
Oh, wait,
within
who's he?
the United 93,
Oh,
the
that,
aircraft.
okay.
Yeah, that Newark area is probably the busiest area within the Tracon. It has a lot of satellite airports, Teterboro, Morristown, plus Newark itself is busier, has more planes, particularly at that time. So that United 93 was delayed, I want to say 30 minutes, 40 minutes. So when it took off, everybody knew about the World Trade being hit. At least when it was up in the air, they knew about it. So maybe it took off 8:40, 8:50, something like that.
Which
So
wasn't
when
the
all
plan.
of us, what?
It wasn't their plan. If they'd maybe taken off earlier.
Yeah, if they would have been taken off early, I think their plan was to go to the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Because another plane, or the White House, because another plane, as we go along, hits the Pentagon. I
Right.
believe it was American 77, but some plane hit the Pentagon. And I believe United 93, that's what they were going to do. But when they got airborne, the people on the plane were on the phone with their relatives, with their family. They knew all about it. And that's what the movie was about. So Ben Sliney in that movie is getting all these reports, and there's also reports of other hijacking. They don't know what's going on. And at a certain point, now this is way after the Tracon stopped the traffic. How much after, I don't know. He said, we better have everybody just land. Just everybody just land, because it got really confusing.
Oh.
And up at our desk, my remembrance is that we then heard about the Pentagon being hit. So a union person, and my role was, again, just answering the phones, and I talked to all the towers called, LaGuardia, Kennedy, Newark, all the controllers that worked there that were going to work that afternoon or work that day. A lot of them called, do you want me to come in? Should I come in?
Well, I remember you stayed later, didn't you, than you usually do?
No, I didn't.
I thought you did. No?
I didn't. I mean, I worked a regular day shift.
But you obviously didn't do what you were there to
I didn't do this
do.
administrative job. I was up at the desk, and all of us were just up at the desk. but like the controllers that worked the desk or the supervisors, like Bob Birch's job, he was a supervisor at the desk. Every one of them that had that job, even if they weren't scheduled to work, called up. Do you want me to come in? Do you want? And I would try to find out from the person that was in charge of that area. I think it was Ronnie Reagan. And some they said yes, some of them said no. We limited who was going to come in because we had no airplanes. We just didn't allow any departures to come in, to go out, and the inbounds were stopped. There were no inbounds. All the inbounds landed wherever they were. That was a local decision. That was also the command center's decision.
So a couple of questions now. So if all planes have landed, there's no departures, blah, blah, blah. I hope this makes sense. So that's going on, but at the same time, I would imagine it's chaotic, right?
It's chaotic because of the phone call and not knowing, and the towers are still calling. We have aircraft that want to take off. What can we do? I got a phone call. It was the governor of New York, not him himself, but the pilot of his airplane. I think it was a Grumman. And he said, we want to land at, I think, LaGuardia. And I answered the phone. That one phone was mine. Bob Birch and the people operationally were doing the operational part. And he said, I said, we're not doing anybody. They can't come in. He said, I'm the governor's pilot. I said, now we don't know what's going on. I talked to the regional office, the same thing. They wanted to know what was going on. We didn't know what was going on. An issue became that the military was called, and we have a separate frequency for military. And it was a little confusing in the beginning when they got there to try. They were forcing some planes down. If they saw a plane in the air that would fly on its own, some of those planes would, what I was told was to help, to fly to an emergency, but we had no way to say that plane's good, this plane's not, I think. And Bob Birch and those other guys would know better than me, but I think that was an issue.
So one of the things in all the things that in all the articles I've read, so this is totally unprecedented, obviously. Right. You touched on that. How can you speak to, was there a certain, how did you guys execute on doing something you've never done? That's basically my question.
I think your training is to just react to what's going on. And when you're insecure, then I've stopped departures. I've put aircraft in holds before. I wouldn't take a handle from somebody. So when the controllers were told, don't take any more airplanes, and they saw somebody flashing at them, they spoke to that controller and said, I don't want that airplane. You got to hold them or do something with them. Right. And what they did with that plane varied. Either they brought them back to another airport to land, or they did something else. But that they didn't have much alternative. They probably were not overjoyed. What happens sometimes on a normal course of events? I was a first line supervisor in the LaGuardia area, and if the controller was working airplanes in the Washington, was going to hand them off to the LaGuardia controller or New York, and he was too busy, he would say to that, hold them, I don't want to work them. And they would put them in holding patterns. So they would put them in 5, 6, 7, 8,000, hold them at a certain altitude, and then one at a time take them from that altitude and make them land someplace. A lot of times they went to places like Philadelphia, where they couldn't come to New York. And that's what happened that day with the planes that were in the air holding.
When everything's going on, because of the training, because of everything you guys have gone through, I would imagine things were tense, but I also imagine it was calm, despite it being so scary. Is that accurate? Because these people are well trained.
I think it was just surreal. It was just, we never experienced like that. So when we heard, like I said, when the first 2 planes went in, and I think we started realizing we were like at war. Then when we heard the Pentagon was hit, we said, oh my God, what the heck is going on? Yeah. And that's when everybody wanted to go home. Everybody wanted to know what was up with their family. Is my family safe? Are they all home? And a lot of people, there was a there was some kind of conference going on in Pennsylvania with controllers, and a lot of them had a hard time coming home.
Was it hard to leave?
No,
I
it
would have
wasn't.
I would have had a hard time leaving because I would have been like, I need to help. I need to do something.
Well, I was there to help for a while, but there's an also insecurity that you want to go home to your family.
Yeah.
This was the whole country was going through this. Now, some people, Jeff Clark, who was in charge, he probably stood very late, and some people did stay. The quality insurance person, they probably had a load of work, but the regular rank and file probably were anxious to get home and beat where they were going to be not allowed to drive places and just follow everything on the news. And that's what we did. But it wasn't, once the planes were not, there were no planes, there was not anything to do, not only for me, but for everybody else. It was just administrative stuff.
And would you say overall, putting it all together, if you were to do a reflection, were people calm? Were people collaborative? Was there arguments? Like, what was the overall?
No, I think they were collaborative. I remember, like I said, when Bob Birch was in charge of the desk, and when Ronnie Reagan came up and Jeff Clark came up, and I remember standing there, and they said, something like, "Are we doing everything we should be doing?" And these people that I'm talking about up at the desk, I was sort of involved up at the desk one time with Avianca, a plane crash.
Right,
But
I remember that.
they have been involved in a lot of situations like this where there was either a plane crash or an incident, so they had to discuss it among each other. And so that's what they basically did. Are we doing everything we should be doing? Should we be doing this? They talked a lot about the military, coordinating with people like Ben Sliney at the command center. There's calls that they had to make, but they seemed collaborative with each other. And nobody was, I think they were hyper, I would say, but not, it was just normal.
Is there anything you think the controllers or you should have done differently?
Yeah, I think the controllers did a great job the first 7 minutes and all that, as far as getting the planes on the ground, not letting departures take off. But I think there should have, and they have a better system now, I understand. Not like I said, I retired after that. But there should have been military presence immediately, and there should have been a way to communicate with with the military about what planes were going to fly to help an emergency situation, that type of stuff. I don't think that was done. And I think Otis Air Force Base, they called them. By the time they called them, if you see the movie United 93, that was a big deal. They were trying to get them to come, and what are we going to do? Maybe even the United plane that hit the World Trade, maybe if it was up long enough to kill it, knock it down, and do something. And I think there was debates about that, but they were so far away from the area. Maybe there's McGuire, there's other places that could have provided some assistance, I think.
But it's sort of crazy to think back to it. I mean, at least for me as a layperson. But when because the thing, and we talked about this, the thing that you've always said is, there was no precedent, there was no protocol in place for what happened. The fact that this plan was, again, executed, and it just sort of happened that quickly when it never happened before, and not more shit happened, is crazy to me. Like, I thought the military or somebody in the US contacted you guys and said, that's it, every plane has to land now. I didn't know that it was starting individually and then it was just your little section. I thought there was more communication.
No, they had nothing to do with it. But I think it does get back to, in that movie, you see Ben dealing with that situation, not knowing what the hell's going on. He's saying, what the hell's going on? And that's the way we felt. We didn't know what was going on, so we didn't want any more planes.
Because the big thing I remember was they didn't know if there were more planes that were hijacked.
Right, right.
And
But that was on a national level, I think.
yes,
Once a plane wouldn't respond or they weren't talking to a plane, they would start being concerned. Is that plane hijacked? Is anybody working that plane? There would be, and that happens in the normal course of events where, uh, not that you lose contact for a short period of time.
right.
Plane doesn't answer you. Maybe the pilot pressed the wrong button.
But
I
how
think
long
they
was it
went through
until
that.
you felt like, okay, we've got a handle on this? Well, or maybe never.
Well, I don't think we I don't think we felt that way. We stopped all traffic. Then we still didn't know what was going on, and we just wanted to regroup then and figure out. But I think once that second plane hit, we realized or felt we were at war. This country was at war, and it was going to change everything. And then, then we heard about. I remember hearing about the Pentagon and United Nine, and you just, oh my God, you just couldn't believe the various things that were going on.
What do you wish the public knew or understood more about air traffic controllers in 9/11?
Well, it's funny. The other day when I was in Florida, um, I was talking to this person about the police, and he said something like, "Well, there's a few bad apples in the police, as policemen." And I said, "Well, it's funny. You can't be a bad apple as an air traffic controller. You can't be so bad because then you wouldn't certify.
Right.
You have to still be able, and that is various degrees of ability. Some controllers are better, they are smoother, they run more airplanes, they don't have as many delays, but all of them have to be able to work those planes safely. That's the key. There may be some slower and faster, but they have to be safe. So even the worst controller is good enough to provide a safe operation.
Oh.
And I think that's, and you can make a mistake, but usually you catch it or the pilot catches it.
So you feel like the public, you would want them to know about 9/11, that these people really are exceptional and that,
Well, that these people trained and did this every day, and then when the time came that day, they responded and then did the right thing, put everybody down safely that had to be safe, and just reacted the way they should. And then another thing was they set up procedures after that to ensure it doesn't happen again. The controllers now they have refresher training, and that's a big part of it, the hijacking part.
is there anything you'd want to highlight that I didn't ask?
The guys like Mr. Birch and the desk people, some of the tower people, Ben Sliney, they made the decisions operationally that had to be made on the time. And I know Bob, I keep on bringing him up because he was in charge at the desk when I went up there. He was concerned knowing that his kids may go to war, yet he did his job.
It seems like it's hard to say who is a hero because so many people had to respond quickly. So do you think that those guys are heroes, or do you think that just the whole thing was an incredible?
I think they all did their job, and they are. They just did their job well, and they are heroes. I'm just saying, the operational people deserve the credit for responding the way they should. And that number, what I said, and again, I think I'm right. 9:03, that plane hit. About 9:09, 9:10, the New York Tracon had no airplanes, and the New York Tracon, if I remember when I was there, did 7,000 to 8,000 operations a day.
How many planes do you think they landed in that time period?
Well, some didn't take off. That was a big thing. They didn't allow anybody to take off. And the planes that were flying, they landed someplace else. One other point, which I was impressed by, was all the controllers, almost to a man, that weren't working that day, called up, "Do you want me to come in?"
Right.
They all wanted to help out. How could I help out? I know when I was answering the phones, every one of those traffic management supervisors called up, and I would try to say, "Yeah, you could come in, but you can't." not in the sense, we don't need you right now.
Right.
Let's stagger you. And I wasn't making the decision. I would ask somebody else, do we need so-and-so today? They said, no, we have somebody from that time frame. So almost to a man, they all called up to want to come work.